Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Great to see everyone here. The brewery was reflecting every time we have a meeting related to the brewery, we probably easily can turn out 75 people, and I think we've exceeded that here today. So again, thanks for coming. So today what we're going to try and do is talk a little bit about where the status of the property is and what we see as the potential future and some of the things that we're going on to position ourselves for the future with the brewery. This is a very large piece of property under multiple ownerships, as you will see. Very complicated and parts of it pretty aged and in need of some major work, and it's really challenging. And the city owns a piece of it, as you will see now. Actually several pieces if you include the land and the water rights. So we're working hard to try and facilitate redevelopment of this property, and there's a lot of moving parts to that. I'll let staff fill you in on all of that. So this morning you have three folks that are gonna talk. Heidi Cerniway is our assistant city administrator and the brewery project manager. She'll talk a little bit about the history. Doan, our city administrator, very capable and I might say incredibly smart and energetic addition to our staff, is going to talk about some great things we've been working on to help promote the brewery and see if we can attract an investor here. And then Noel Rubadue is from South Puget Sound Community College is going to talk about their program and how we're trying to position ourselves as a center of excellence for brewing and distilling and cider making here in Tumwater. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heidi and have fun. This is really a cool topic. So thanks for coming.
So it's an honor to be here again. My name is Heidi Cerniway with the City of Tumwater. And for Tumwater staff and also our elected leadership, it's really been a labor of love because the brewery is really part of our community and has deep roots in our community. So my job today is to take you through brewery history. Since this is a history talk, we're going to talk about the brewery and its context and its influence really in the identity and formation of Tumwater. And this is going to be a pretty quick trip because in a few minutes I'm going to take you through about 120 years. And I'll do that with a number of photos because we have access to a lot of great photos thanks to the Olympia Tumwater Foundation and folks from the community who share those. And so following that, I'm going to talk about, again, kind of how we got to where we're at today, the current status and really the strategy employed in the brewery project, because as the mayor mentioned, it's a very complex project, lots of moving parts, so we're going to break that apart for a little bit for you. And just know that we're not going to tell you everything because we would be here all day and probably into tomorrow. So we have just a short period of time, so we're going to try to catch you up on what we're doing, and we can certainly stick around afterward and answer any questions as well. So is everybody ready for a ride? Get your seatbelts on. Here we go. All right. So it really all started with a man named Leopold Schmidt in 1895 who came to this area. Leopold was a state representative in the state of Montana, owned a brewery, and he came here looking in Olympia, Washington because we had a new state capital, and he heard about the water. Leopold actually was a sailor by trade before he went into brewing and politics, and he also loved the water. We had the Deschutes River waterfalls here, and we had the estuary. We are the southern tip of Puget Sound. But when the word is, when he was in a barber shop in downtown Olympia, he heard about the springs, the artesian springs in Tumwater. So the picture on the left is actually the letter he sent with a sample of that water to be tested, and he found out that water was perfect for the type of beer he wanted to brew. So he sold his operation in Butte. He bought bought a site, and the picture on the right is actually the old Biles Tannery, and he bought that for under $5,000, about 5 acres of property right at the base of the Deschutes River and the bottom of South Puget Sound. And he started brewing in 1896 under the name of Capital Brewing Company, and he did brew Olympia beer. The name of the beer was Olympia beer, but he brewed under the name of the Capital Brewing Company. In 1902, he actually changed the name of the brewing company to Olympia Brewing Company. And with that tagline, it's the water. He was brought here by the water, his beer was brewed with that water, and it truly was the water. And that tagline is still used by Olympia Beer today. The old brew house was built in 1906. There was a huge demand for Leopold Schmidt's beer, and he had learned how to brew with quality ingredients, and he knew how to take care of the yeast, and so there was a very consistent, high-quality product, and as the result of that, demand continued to grow for his beer. The site that he built on in 1896 continued to grow and change constantly. There was so much demand. His original brewing system was a 50 barrel size brewing system. He built a brick brew house, so that old wooden structure was replaced with a brick brew house in 1905. They began brewing there in 1906. The brew house was actually very innovative for its time. It was built for gravity brewing, so the brewing process took place from top to bottom, and the grain would start at the top and the process would move down to the bottom. Again, very innovative in its time, and it's a beautiful and majestic structure. This is one of my favorite photos taken in just about 1906, right after it was operating. And you can see the amount of industry. This site was served by water and by rail and by the one access road that is still there today. So the Schmidt family was really known for their community values and their equitable treatment of their employees. And the early years created many jobs in our community and supported many other businesses in our community. The brewing business was an important part of our economy from the many early years. And the operation on that original site continued until Prohibition, which actually in Washington State adopted Prohibition earlier than the rest of the country. So January 1st, 1916, all brewing production stopped at that site. So that old brew house was really used for brewing for only about 10 years. After Prohibition, Leopold Schmidt actually passed away in 1914, and the Schmidts they hung on to the brew house and the site for a period of time. They attempted to create apple juice, and they weren't terribly successful. That business lasted for a few years. Later in the 20s, the site was sold and was used for a paper mill, and some additional construction was done on site. There have been a number of other uses since that time. There was a rumor actually that airplane part manufacturing was done in the 40s, but the folks at the Olympia Tumwater Foundation have dispelled that myth. And there were a couple other businesses that ran into the 50s. Jensvold Manufacturing, Western Metalcraft actually produced other metal lockers, gym lockers, things like that on the site. So the historic site was used for a number of years. So what happened after Prohibition was repealed in the 1930s? There was still a demand for Leopold's beer. And so the Olympia Brewing Company they started rebuilding, but they had sold the other site and it was under other uses, so they continued on the other side of the street. So just south of here, on the south side of Custer Way, they began building a new site to start producing the high demand Olympia beer. And remember, that was Alaska Gold Rush days too, so the demand grew very significantly. And by the 1940s, I love this photo, by the 1940s, you can see the brand new Capitol Way Bridge with the totem structures on it. This is the amount of buildup that happened in under 10 years. Again, the site just continued to multiply. The demand for their product continued to multiply. This is a major business in our community, lots of jobs, and just continued. Again, this was the core of our community, located right along the Deschutes River. This is also one of my favorite pictures. This is probably from the Olympia Brewing Company in its heyday. Early 80s, the structure, or the Olympia Brewing Company actually drew thousands of visitors each day and each year. There was a record number, nearly 300,000 people visited during the World's Fair, I believe in 1962. And again, really core part of our industry and core part of our community. And you can see with its location, right in the heart of everything. This is also one of my favorite pictures because doesn't it bring you back? And again, very popular. This was a place, our community was known for the brewery. You travel across the country, this community, people would say, isn't there a brewery in Olympia or in Tumwater? People would come from far away. If you had visitors in town, where did you go? You went to the brewery. Very, very popular part of our community. And one of my staff stopped into the office today and recalled his visit to the brewery when he was younger, and he said it was like Disneyland. He said it was spotless. It was absolutely amazing. And again, very pristine operations. The brewery ownership went through a number of transitions starting in the 80s, and there was a trend in the brewing industry to consolidate. And unfortunately, our brewery was part of that consolidation, and it was sold to actually Pabst in the early 80s. In the late 90s, I believe it was 1999, Miller Coors actually took over that, and then South African Brewing, SAB Miller, in early 2000s. And the brewery was actually closed. The last whistle was June 12th, 2003. So it's been over almost 14 years. So some of the challenges of this site today, in just a little bit, I'll back up a hair and talk about what happened. So after 2003, what happened is our community was hopeful that someone would come in and buy it. After 14 years, we've all realized that eventually happened, but it didn't happen the way everyone expected to. The brewery site was pretty complex, lots of working parts to that, and it was built up for one business. And so it's a really difficult site to reuse. The site actually ended up in bankruptcy and has been since split up. And some of the challenges to reusing that really involve the multiple ownerships that have resulted. Also the structures, they were built for one purpose, and that was really brewing. And so reusing those structures in a way that's meaningful and helpful to another organization is really challenging. The infrastructure going in, our community has built up around that site pretty significantly over the last decade too, and so it presents other challenges. And as infrastructure ages, new water and sewer piping, things like that to the site, and require a significant amount of investment. And the building conditions have significantly deteriorated over time. So we talk about the brewery kind of in two sections. Really the older section, the historic site, which is north of Custer Way, and the southern site. We call this the Noel, the brew house, the buildings that were built south of Capitol Way, kind of south of Custer, north of Capitol. And this conglomeration here we call on the Noel. And this site and The warehouses in the valley were all purchased by a hotel developer in late 2015. That developer is working on plans. As you know, if you have significant square footage, you need to figure out a plan for using that. This is a site that's difficult for one particular user. It will not be a mega brewery again because it does need so much work. But they're working on a strategy to pull that together and trying to work through some of the access points and some of the challenges to rebuilding that infrastructure and making sure that they have an anchor tenant so they can build around that anchor tenant. The other side of the street is the historic site. This, again, with the old brew house and the rest of the warehouses that were built up over time, was actually part of the brewery's ownership. They bought it back, I believe, in the late 60s. It was used for storage and things like that since. This was purchased out of bankruptcy in about 2010 by a gentleman named George Heigerken and Falls Development. And this site, I'll share a little bit more about that later. So when you have a complex project, we always like the how do you eat an elephant analogy. It's one bite at a time. So we have a really complex project with different ownerships, different challenges. And in 2010, the community said, nothing's happening with this. What can we do about it? So we actually went through a process, a community visioning process, saying, what can we do? What do we see here? What do we want here as a community? And out of that came a couple of pieces. One really important thing was this is too big for any one entity to do. It's too expensive for a private company to come in and use this. So you need to chunk this out. You need to separate this into smaller pieces. And then the second piece was there needs to be some sort of public support of this process. It's never going to pencil out for the private sector. And so you need to figure out how we as a community can support this. So out of that came a strategy, and we're still working on that strategy today. We have it on our website. We can continue to update it and work on things. So we're actually coming at this from a perspective where how can we remove the barriers to redeveloping and reusing the site, and then how can we incentivize investments, and where can we find opportunities to break things down and move them forward so it's not just sitting here as one big hole and for something waiting to happen. So that's been the strategy, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those pieces as we move forward here. A number of things have been done since that time. The visioning process really kicked off a number of activities that have all been part of that strategy. Really looking at the whole district around the brewery as the community has built up around it. The question is, when the brewery is reused, how do people get there? How does it fit into the rest of the community? So that brewery district plan was put together that reflects the zoning and the community's vision for what they want in the brewery again. And how do we mobilize? How do we use our land around that and transportation? Also looking at what are the market needs? What are the things? What are the opportunities out there in the community that might be viable needs here? What does our community need as far as space? Is it housing? Is it commercial? All kinds of things. So that was part of the market study. And then looking at the brewery site specifically at the historic site, looking for what are the interests. Since the mid-90s, there have been a number of public movements to try to get the historic site under the public domain. It captures our history. It's a beautiful spot. And so, what are the opportunities for public participation in that, if that's an important part of a community? And then looking into how can we pave the way for redevelopment, and looking at the city and the owner of the historic site working on something called a planned action, and really looking at the environmental impacts and the level of development that the historic site can support. And that's sort of laying the table or setting the table for reuse of that site. And we'll talk about the Craft Brewing and Distilling Center as an addition here. So a couple of exciting things that have happened in the last, actually just this last year, as part of the discussions when we looked at where's the opportunity in especially the historic site for public participation. We came up with how much would it cost if the public took on the old brew house and restored the old brew house? And the price tag on that came to be about a $6 million price tag. And that ended up being part of a fruitful discussion with the property owner, who said, I'm never going to get rents out of this that would support this, and this is a historic structure. It also is part of the story of the community. And last year in April 2016, the owner donated that property to the city of Tumwater. So the city actually owns a new piece of that structure. It's a lovely, majestic building, but it's got about 100 years of deferred maintenance. So there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done on that site. And along with that came 12 feet around the building, so really just own a footprint of the building and the access, the trail easements into that site. Because the other part of the discussion is, if we fix this up, how do we get people there? And the most viable opportunity to do that is through our trail system, which the city has been working on for a number of years. The old brew house is in need of some assistance, as you can see. When we had the architects look at the site and say, how much would it cost? One of the questions we asked them was, is it too late? Is this structure repairable? And they said, it's absolutely not too late. We've seen structures like this before in much worse condition, and we've been able to restore them. Mostly, at this point, it's superficial, or it's on the face that needs repair. What you're looking at are, again, this is a 6-story building, so you're looking at the 6th floor with a copper roof, which is still intact, needs a little bit of sealing. You're also looking at the 5th floor, and when they built this building, they didn't build the roofs with much pitch to them, so in a nice wet climate, those deteriorate very rapidly. So it's missing roofs on floor 5 and then floor 4. And you can see a fair amount of brick decay. So this is also a very wet climate. Brick does not like to be exposed to wet. And so the most erosion is around the edges. So one of the goals is to look at how do we restore this? And we brought a team of people together, and they said, you need to stop the weather. You need to weatherize this just to seal it up to make sure that it doesn't continue to decay. And I can tell you, I've been down there this winter. This is a rough winter for our old brew house. The bricks do something called spalling when they get moisture inside the brick surface, and then it freezes and thaws. They just shed off, and so it's actually become a little unsafe to walk around the building because sometimes entire bricks come off. So we've actually fenced around the structure too, and we're working on with some very generous people in our community. We're actually working on a plan to do some emergency weatherization this summer. We have some engineering supports and some contractors in town and some volunteers who are working with us to actually do a temporary roof and to also seal off the windows so we can seal that up. And the strategy from there is going to be, we're working on building a capital campaign strategy. We're also working with the state on a grant, and so to start phasing this in. So one of the most significant costs to doing this structure, the brick is significant, but we do live in a place in the world where we do get earthquakes, and so the seismic retrofits are probably some of the most intense costs for this structure. And so that's part of the $6 million price tag, or $6.5 million. We'll add a little bit to that in order to fix it up down the road. But we'll be working on breaking that down into pieces, and the temporary roofs and windows are the first place to start, and you will see some activity down there this summer as we move to put those on. And our goal is with just this with with this emergency phase just to use our volunteers and donations as much as we can. And we're going to need your help, community, as we move forward and continue to actually raise funds in order to protect this well into the future. The other thing we've been working on, as I mentioned, we had the opportunity to get some trail easements across the property, and this will be part of our trail system that will build into the future. So eventually, Tumwater will have a trail system that runs from Pioneer Park, follows the Deschutes, and all the way to Historical Park, and across the river, over onto the brewery site, and around to join up with Olympia's woodland trail system as well. So really part of the regional trail system as we move forward. So pretty exciting. The city's actually working on, if you haven't been down to Historical Park lately, you can see the most recent segment, and the next segment is actually working with Tumwater Falls Park and the Olympia Tumwater Foundation to build the next segment along the trail system. And we also realize it's incredibly important for people to tell their story. As Don mentioned, actually I think he mentioned before we started this, that the city and the Olympia Tumwater Foundation have been putting together some of our history and really trying to document some of our stories. As we know, when we talk to people around the community, people have a connection to the brewery, and we want to make sure that we help inform that connection. So we have some resources out there. Don Trosper actually is the spokesperson for our Talking Over Old Times, and thanks to Robert Cam too from TC Media, put together stories and short clips of the brewery and the Schmidt family. And we also have been working on, last year we did some tours. I'm not sure we'll be able to continue those because of the site conditions, but making sure people have the opportunity. Many people who have lived in this community have never been able to see the old brew house and that site, and there is really something truly magical about that site, and people want to get there. And also there are other support organizations, and we realize the importance of telling our story and helping people understand what we're doing here, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to our city administrator, who is very smart, and John Doan, and he's going to talk a little bit about what we're doing to bring brewing back.
Heidi does such a wonderful job telling that history. I'm challenged to keep this as interesting as that was. As Heidi said in her presentation, she talked about how when you go anywhere in this country, you tell people you're from Olympia or Tumwater, and folks say, wasn't there a brewery there, or didn't you make beer? I mean, there's a phenomenal thing that I sort of discovered as I would travel around, and we call that brand equity. That has value, okay? And when we think about how do we incentivize a redevelopment of something, certainly a city or whoever can write checks and help pay for things, but we don't have a lot of money to do that, okay? So when we looked at what could we do to incentivize this project, let's get a hold of that brand equity. Let's make it work for us, okay? So it begins with what we call bringing brewing back and talking about ways to bring brewing back. And so we started about 5 years ago with a brew fest. This year it's on August 19th. And we've had as many as about 3,000, 3,500 people show up to our brew fest. We do it at the golf course in the driving range. It's a phenomenal location, and people who are in the craft brewing community, and also some of the cider, spirit, wine folks also show up. But it's primarily about brewing, because that's what the tagline is. It's bring brewing back. And we'll do that again this year. And it's trying to keep the knowledge and the understanding and the appreciation for the legacy of Tumwater in front of people. If you realize, people who are, for the most part, under the age of 35 in this community probably don't remember very well when the brewery was active. It closed when they were about 18 years old. Okay? Okay? So we have to continue to talk about what this was, what happened, how this community existed because of having the brewery here. So we also said we have this brand equity. How can we leverage that? What's happening in the brewing community, and what does that look like? And as Heidi said, there's a lot of consolidation happening amongst the big breweries. Okay, the Anheuser-Busch's and the Millers and the SAB and those people. But part of the reason why that's happening is because craft brewing has grown. And so we sort of spent some time sort of looking at what's happening in the craft brewing industry. And this is sort of some interesting sort of stats. Essentially, overall beer consumption is pretty much flat, no pun intended, in terms of growth in this country. But mass production beer consumption is declining, and craft beer consumption is going up. Okay? So that's a great indicator. Okay, and for those who don't know, I mean, craft beer, like its name implies, has been made a little bit slower, a little more attention to the product, what goes into it. Maybe it's the hops, it's the barley, it's the water. We know the water is important, but it's also about telling a story. Okay, so many buyers aren't looking for just, a mass production sort of, I want, 6 beers or whatever, but they're looking for something that has a story to it. What are the ingredients? Even so much as, who is the farmer who grew the hops, and what's their story, and when did they come to the state of Washington? And they're a 4th-generation farmer. And people will pay more. It creates additional value, a value added, for that sort of product versus a product that doesn't have a story to tell. Okay? So that's really sort of how the industry has changed. But we also realized there were 2 other sort of cousins to the beer industry that have taken off. I think this next slide, there we go. So in terms of craft beer production in the United States, our state is in 2nd place in terms of the number of breweries per capita. There are about 310 craft breweries in Washington state. And there's a new one opens just about every week. And even in our own community, we had a meeting of brewers, distillers, and cider makers about a year and a half ago, and there were 8 of them. Okay? We had another meeting earlier this week, and there were 16 of them. Okay? I'm trying to figure out if that's an arithmetic progression or geometric. Is it going to double or just go up by 8 every year? But the craft beer industry has grown phenomenally. With that, is the cider industry, craft cider. So this is hard cider that's made from not the fruit apples that you see, like the red and the golden delicious, but the older apples, the pippins and the others that we would see often in our backyards, places like that. And it's essentially a variation of winemaking, and you make a fermented apple juice, and it is incredibly popular in the market. The state of Washington, Oregon, and California, the people who live in those 3 states, drink about 80% of the hard cider for the nation. Okay? So what that means is, A, we drink a lot, and B, there are tremendous markets in the rest of the country. We met with some folks from Texas a couple of weeks back who said it's really, they can't do cider, they don't have apples, and they know cider is popular, but they just can't get enough of it. And so that's a tremendous area for growth. We have the most number of cideries in the nation. There are 57 cider makers in the state of Washington. And then comes spirits. Whiskey, gin, vodka, bourbon, all of those. If you don't know, you essentially have to make beer before you can make a distilled spirit. You distill the beer in order to take the alcohol out and then create a spirit. Okay, so it's very much a cousin of beer making. There are about 110 craft distilleries in Washington. A year and a half ago when I showed this slide, I could have told you that we had the most number of craft distilleries in the nation. Okay. Certainly in Tennessee and Kentucky, they have much larger distilleries, but not as many of them. So we have a lot more folks who are focused on the product and the ingredients and the craftsmanship that goes into making those particular products. But some of the folks in Colorado and California and places like that have surpassed us a little bit. So think about what to do with all that growth, all that demand. We know we have this brand equity. We look at what we call the Walla Walla model. And in short, probably many of you remember the city of Walla Walla before about 1985. If you went there, it was either one of the little colleges that was there, you had a friend there or a student or whatever, or it was the prison. Okay? That's what you remembered about Walla Walla. And the other day, had a friend who went to Walla Walla, had never been there before. They went there to taste some wine and go to some wineries. I said, "Did you see the prison?" He said, "What prison?" And so the Walla Walla model essentially was, while there was grape growing and some amount of wine production going on in the state of Washington prior to 1985, and it was really being done by Washington State University sort of in a research context, what happened in the mid-'80s was Walla Walla Community College said, there are all these wineries who need people to work in the, taking care of the grapes on the viticulture side, and then we also have people who need to understand the food science laws and how to actually make wine on the enology side. And so they began to create a community college-based workforce education program for the wine industry, and it was phenomenal. And at about that time, there were about 85 wineries in the state of Washington. There are over 1,000 wineries today in the state of Washington, and much of that is credited to the fact that Walla Walla Community College created a program to educate the workforce to go into that industry. So we said, well, voila, who's doing that for beer, cider, and spirits? And really, no one is, not certainly at the level that Walla Walla is. There are some small programs around at different institutions. There's like a beer program here, or if you go down to UC Davis, I think there's a brewing program. There's a distilling program, I think maybe in Chicago or something like that. Actually, if you really want to know distilling, you have to go to Scotland. And so we said, maybe this is an opportunity, and we did a feasibility study to look at what demand there could be, and it came back and said there's phenomenal demand. The industry needs people with these skills. And that became really the sort of the initial thought around what Heidi said, the center of excellence around craft brewing, distilling, and cider making. Let's create a place that can focus on education, bring experts from the industry, create, what about all those secondary industries? And so when we do that, we sort of look at an entire supply chain. And as I'm prone to say all the time, we like to talk about the brewers and the distillers, and they're sort of the sexy ones at the story. Everybody talks about, oh, yeah, he's the brewer, he's the distiller, that's awesome. But the folks at Fish Brewing will tell you that if you can't put the cap on the bottle and do it quickly, your beer goes bad, and it doesn't matter if you make the best beer in the world. If you can't cap it right, what does it matter? So you need people who can clean the equipment and follow the licensing laws and meet all the food science food safety regulations. You need that piece of the supply chain. You need people with business skills. They don't fail because the distiller's not good. They fail because they can't scale up. They can't get access to capital. There's a lot of business things that cause a brewery or a distillery or a cidery to fail. We also need to have incredible connections to the rest of the industry. For example, it makes sense that cider and beer and spirits would be a significant part of Washington's economy because we grow so much wheat. We're the apple capital of the nation. We grow 70% of the nation's hops. Those inbound products are incredibly important to a craft industry. And if folks don't know, we always think about the wheat in eastern Washington. It's a really important part of Washington's economy, and we export a lot of wheat. But there's amazing wheat production happening in Skagit County. Okay? The WSU Research Center, there's a bread lab up there that's internationally recognized, and there's a field of wheat that has 14,000 different varieties of wheat in it. And some of those are heirloom grains that have been around for 100 years, some of which have never been used. So part of the challenge is can we capture some of those heirloom grains and actually make a new and a completely different kind of beer out of an heirloom grain? So that becomes sort of the challenge of the supply chain of how we can make craft industry in the state of Washington grow and flourish and become even more significant. And in the heart of that is the city of Tumwater. And I don't expect you to read all of this. We call this the wheel. These are all the different aspects when we talk about a center of excellence. It is about education. It is about suppliers and industry activity. It's about historical resources. It's about, is there a way to create a museum? Or how do we distribute historical information out to people? Things just like what we're doing today at lunch. To redevelopment, ultimately, of the brewery, because for the city, now let's go back to the initial strategy. We have a brand. How do we utilize that brand? What we want to do is make this so attractive to people that we have folks coming in saying, you know what, I want to be in that old brewery building, because we want to be a part of Tumwater. And we want to be part of that legacy by being in that historic building. So it is a slow journey, but it's been a very rewarding journey. We think a lot of the offshoots of it are both beneficial, very beneficial to Tumwater, to Thurston County, and also to the state of Washington. And frankly, even beyond the state of Washington, anybody who's been down to Portland knows that the craft industry there is flourishing just as strong as what's going on here in Washington. So a significant part of that is the education component. And so we have had a phenomenal partner in South Puget Sound Community College. They have stepped up to creating a program that I believe will have nationwide recognition for what it will do and will continue to do in these industries for our entire country. So with that, let me introduce the Dean of Corporate and Continuing Education at SPSCC, Noel Rubadue.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Noel Rubadue, South Puget Sound Community College Dean for Corporate and Continuing Ed, and I'm located at the college's Lacey campus. And if you haven't been out to the new Lacey campus, we've been there about a year and 8 months, and we are co-located with the Thurston Economic Development Council. And as part of that combination, we created an entity under that called the Center for Business and Innovation. So when we think about how are we supporting business and industry, we have a whole campus that's looking at how we support business and industry in our area. So during that move, I got to hear about this great project going on in Tumwater, and being a native to Olympia, graduated from Tumwater High School, somebody needed to be on the project from the college, and I raised my hand. It sounded like a project that probably everybody else wanted to be on in the room also. So I got to start going around with the city of Tumwater and hearing from industry what the needs were. I got to really get an idea of what the vacancies were here in the city for people to maybe come in and redevelopment. I got to go on many tours with Paul down at the brew site. And what kind of resonated with me is no matter who went down there with you, whether it was industry, a community member, people from out of town, they visited this place and they said, you have to do this here. There's a need, and this is a magical place, and stuff has to happen here. So the college's role is more to look at how can we do an education center that supports the workforce needs of the industry. Because as we saw with Walla, the support for the industry's education helps move the industry forward. In cider and brewing, most people are learning in their garages, their bathrooms, their kitchens, their home brewing. With distilling, if you're doing that, you don't need to tell anybody that you're doing that, because there's a lot of felony things that go along with that. So when you think about how do people learn, when there's a huge investment of infrastructure that needs to go into buildings, into equipment, into everything, if you want to be a whiskey maker, you have to age it. So you're going to invest all this money at the front end. You don't even know if it's going to turn out on the back end. And so it's like, how do we start supporting people and getting them in and learning these skills, honing their recipe development, and making sure that they have the business skills to be able to go out and be successful when they get there. So the college basically kind of started taking the small steps. So again, it's the elephant analogy. And what we decided is a lot of people don't really know what craft is. They have their whiskey they like, they have the beer they like, they have their go-to cider. And they're a little bit like, I'm going to stick with what I know. But if we worked on consumer education, why is craft important? Why does certain ingredients make a difference to what you're tasting? You know, what is the story behind these? That people would feel a little bit more comfortable in asking for things or trying things out. And a better consumer pushes the market forward. Because what we heard from industry is, unless they come to our tasting room and learn about us, they probably won't ever know that we even exist, because it's so hard to get on the shelves. So the first thing we can do is start consumer education, and that's through the non-credit realm. So we have partnered with a local group called the Whiskey People and created a Whiskey Appreciation Certificate. It's a 5-course certificate. I know a lot of you don't think you need a certificate to appreciate it, but it really goes through the language, the flavor profiles, and then you get to kind of try some stuff. I mean, nobody wants to go buy an $80 bottle of whiskey if you don't know that you're going to like it, if you don't kind of have an idea of what your palate is. So the certificate's really fun to learn about that. You learn about the business portions of it, distribution, you get to learn about cocktails, food pairings, things like that. We also have partnered with our local industry people to do on-site classes. So we've done 3 different beer making classes. We have one coming up in the fall at Fish Brewing. So we did, you know, dark beer was this last one, and then the fall we're doing an ale. So people can come, they spend an entire day with the beer maker, see how it goes, and then let it ferment, and then they come back and get to learn to bottle it and then take it with them. So that, again, is, you know, those people that are kind of in their bathroom or maybe deciding to move to the garage to a little bit bigger system, get a better idea of what they're doing and how they want to move forward. We've also done cocktail making classes so that you can kind of see, and we've done those in partnership with our local distilleries, Salish, Sandstone, and tried to kind of teach people about regular cocktails they may enjoy with a well, vodka or spirit, and then decide what are our local products that could be something that I like instead. So we have a lot of consumer classes coming up. They change quarterly and are on our website. At the same time, it's ready to start moving into the credit realm. So when you decide to do a credit program, there are a lot of hoops that you have to go through. And so we have been working through those hoops for the last year. So we have an associate in applied science that will be starting in the fall. So right now we're working on the application packet. The biggest challenge for this is beer, distilling, and cider. We have them all in the same program. Plus you have your English, your math, your humanities, all of those. How do you combine the curriculum across all of those things and make it more contextualized? So people in math are learning about scalability and volume and things like that in relation to brewing, distilling, and cider making. So it's been a lot of work for our faculty also to kind of come up to speed on what that looks like. Our grandiose plan when we first decided we were going down this road of brewing, distilling, and cider making education was we have to have a big building, right? Well, there's not a lot of money out there to do big buildings under the state government system. And also, being a community college, we are a state entity. So when you think about a state entity producing beer, cider, and spirits, that's a whole nother set of paperwork and things that have to be done. So as we started working through what would this look like, what's the square footage, what else do we need, we realized we really needed industry partners. And we needed established distillers, brewers, and cider makers to be a part of our program, not only teaching in it, but perhaps then they're the people that are producing, not the college producing. So in that sense, we've been working with independent people to try to figure out what does this look like, how does it all fit together. But the education space alone is only about 6,000 square feet. So we don't need that much education space. It's the production space that's going to take up most of the space and what we need. So right now the college is in negotiations with the Port of Olympia on possibly having it in the brewing district. And I think that's the other thing that I think Tumwater has done a really good job of, is it's not just about the two sites that we think of, where it's the historic site or the brew house on the knoll. There's so much activity going on in the entire Tumwater area. As you said, down by the airport, there's some warehouse space where some small breweries have already moved in and opened. We have others popping up all around. So it's a district that we're looking at, and the hope is you're trying to create critical mass. When you get critical mass, it's your Woodland, it's your Walla Walla, because you don't want to go someplace to visit one place, you want to go someplace and visit 10. So I think that's the other thing that we're looking at, is how do we start to put all of these things close together so that you get that synergy and you get that hub of activity of people coming here and recognizing this space as where they need to come. I would also say the industry has also, they're very young. We don't think about them as young, but in organizational cases, they're young. Most of their guilds, brewer associations, and that are still very young. So they're looking to us to partner to establish QA requirements. So quality assurance is something that's really important to them right now. And that's what we want to make sure we're getting across in the education. Because if you go somewhere and you have a really bad beer, you're probably not going to try it again. So they don't want that kind of, experience to happen. They want everybody to have a great experience when they try these new beverages. So in the fall, we will launch our academic program, and I think we just have it says next slide, but it doesn't like me. Here, I'll try this. So this is the college website. It does have the academic programs on it. It also has the non-credit programs, but we're also linked to the city, the Economic Development Council, and the college have another website, and I would encourage you to join it. It's the one that's telling the stories. So anything that's coming out that's new around education, new industries moving into the area, movement on the historic properties, it tells a constant story. So if you're interested in staying up to date, I would say go to that website. There, I'm sure there's pamphlets out there to get on it. And the industry is very supportive of this. So again, I have a feeling that there's a lot of questions out there. And so I think I'd be interested in basically opening it up for questions from everybody and having Heidi and John join me. So question.
Hey, I was wondering, you've mentioned the wonderful donation of the old historic brew house. How are, like, the person who owns the hotel site, some of the other properties, are they amenable? Are they open to participating in this thing and helping? Because when you talk about a district, the more central you can have things located, obviously, the better. So there's this beautiful, whole bunch of space. What are the owners telling me?
Well, I'll talk about just from the college perspective, and then I'll hand it off to the city to talk about, because they have a lot more. When I said you only need 6,000 square feet for the education component, that's 1 million square feet building. So when you talk about the college being a part of this gigantic building, we're such a small part without other people coming in. It just doesn't make sense for them to go that direction. So, I hope at some time we're all together. They're very wonderful people that love the concepts. They're very supportive, but they need some big things to happen in those spaces.
And I would just add on to this, one of the things we've recognized is there's a timing element to this, because being the leader in the education program, there's an opportunity here in Washington State that is available to other people too, and other people are paying attention to what we've been doing to help build the supports for the industry here. And in fact, we were visited by a college from Dallas just a couple weeks ago that said, what are you doing here and how can we do it? And so there's an opportunity. The college is doing something very unique, but they also need to get on it. And so they need to be up and running probably in the next year as we look at how these industries and the supports happen. So if Washington State truly wants to be the leader in this, and we want this to continue to benefit and feed into our community, they have a timeline they need to meet to get their education program up and off the ground and to be able to build on that. So part of being at the brewery is that that's going to be a little bit longer in that small piece. They need a site, and they kind of need it now. So, yeah.
In this presentation, I feel like we're kind of balkanizing what already is a pretty active brewing operation within the South Sound region. And you've addressed Fishtail Ale, for example, or Fish Brewing, or whatever they are, to be providing you with some training. And we were talking about having this district, yet at no time did I really hear the downtown in Olympia being involved in this, which in fact, I think we have 2 breweries there with another one on the way, all within a few blocks of one another. And spending a lot of time in Bend, where they've got all kinds of breweries, and they're spread out all over the Bend area. I think that, are we missing the whole tie-in with what the city of Olympia, or not Olympia, but the industry has done in the downtown Olympia area?
Yeah, I hope we're not. We were designated. Thurston County has a designation from the state of Washington as the Innovation Partnership Zone for craft brewing and distilling. Okay, and there are 13 other of these Innovation Partnership Zones around the state, and that designation applies to all of Thurston County. And certainly in Tumwater, we love to have folks come to Tumwater and be a part of Tumwater and be a part of the investment and the energy that's happening here. That's awesome. We also want downtown Olympia to be wildly successful. And you know what? Fish has a great location there, and we would never want to jeopardize that. And there's some other folks, there's 3 Magnets, and there's the Blind Pig Distillery, and I think other folks on their way to downtown, and we hope that continues too. And there's folks in Lacey, and folks may move around a little, but this is a lot bigger than Tumwater, and so we hope it can continue to happen here and there and in other places, and like I said, quite frankly, around the state of Washington.
Now, I would just add, we actually met with our industry group for the Innovation Partnership Zone meeting, and we had people from Lacey, Olympia, Thurston County, and our new brewers in Tumwater as well. And so this is about working together and making sure that our businesses that are operating, or people that want to operate in this industry, are connected to the business supports and also the research support. So Washington State University has been a partner as well. And so making sure that we can bring people together in order to get them what they need to help grow. So,
yeah. Different craft beverage producers have different models. I mean, we have some people who say, I want to be in Tumwater. I grew up in Tumwater. I want to be in Tumwater. I want my thing in Tumwater. We have other people who are just, we met one of the folks at that meeting who's just as strong about, I want to be in downtown Olympia. It's not that he doesn't like Tumwater, but he very much believes in the redevelopment of downtown Olympia and wants to be part of that. And other people want to have visibility to the freeway, and other people want to be in the woods. And you know what? Thurston County is big enough, we can make all that work.
And it does speak to the critical mass. Like you said, when you go to Bend, you don't just drive one place and stay there, for the whole day. You visit all the different areas. And Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater, you can't really tell when you leave one and you go to another one most of the time. And our people that visit us are not going to know that either. So I do think it's totally, Thurston County is what we're really looking at, and bringing people in from out the area.
And I just would like to add too that how do we bring this back to benefit the brewery site is we continue, and we are continuing to work with our property owners to help them structure. Again, they have big spaces to fill, but help make those connections for those people who want to be here that fit their timeline and availability too. So really continuing to grab that interest and make sure it gets to where it needs to go.
Thank you.